Very good evening to all the dignitaries and delegates. St. Peter's Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences is delighted to welcome you all to this international webinar on good clinical practices in clinical research. I would now request our principal, Dr. P. Rajashekar, to deliver the welcome address.
Sir, you need to unmute your. Rajagiri, please unmute.
Good evening, everyone. So this is Dr. Rajshekar addressing the total gathering on behalf of St. Peter's Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences. I welcome everyone present in this session, the speakers, management, and all that coordinators and people working for this webinar to happen positively. And also, I welcome all the delegate students. And I wish this will be like a successful learning for you. And without wasting much time, I just hand this session back to Praveen sir so that things will be smoothly running. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. I would now kindly request the visionary behind St. Peter's Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences, our chairman, Sri T. Jayapal Reddy, sir, to deliver the presidential address.
A great good evening to everyone, especially all the student delegates and delegates registered across the country from various colleges. And even I've seen a couple of delegates coming from registered from other countries too. So on behalf of the organizing committee of St. Peter's Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences, we are doing this particular program in collaboration with the ISPOR, Telangana chapter, which is resident office in St. Peter's Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences, and also IP Hanamkunda branch, which is also hosted at St. Peter's Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences. On behalf of Dr. Praveen, Ranadir, and our principal, Dr. Rajshekar, and all the head of the departments of the institution and management, and faculty in particular, and the people behind this particular program. I appreciate all you coming up with this wonderful topic on this good clinical practices. I think this is the order of the day. And at this juncture, I think the world is looking at your specialization, your specialty. So world requires you all people. So I think in that context, I think I should really appreciate all the speakers who have accepted for this particular program. And all the 4 sessions are interlinked. And at the end of the sessions, I think definitely every participant, including me and everyone who are going to witness this particular program, we know how to practice this GCP. I think this is very much important so that in the days to come, as a clinical pharmacist or a practicing pharmacist or a teaching pharmacist, you name it, you play a different role in your life. But at the end of the day, our central focus point is only on the patient, because this particular program, I think whatever we learn, at the end, everything emerges at one particular point is the patient, where we want to give our add-on services to the patient. We want to give a bharosa to the patient. We want to give what we call our experience helping hand to the doctors and nurses in the hospital, and even in the what we call the pharmacy practice centers, community pharmacies, wherever the drug selling, the prescription, whatever it is. You are the first check for every what we call the prescription. I think once you follow up all these kind of things, when you are meticulous about your knowledge, I think every patient is going to benefit. We know every year we are losing more than 3 million patients across the world because of adverse drug reactions, wrong medications, wrong prescriptions. Okay, even in the clinical trials, wherever there is a shortage of manpower with the experts from the pharmacies, I think there the problems are arising. I think I wish these particular kind of programs will really help, will motivate the youngsters, the young generation, because tomorrow is yours. Whether it's a drug development, discovery, research, or in the clinical setup, for the approvals. Today we are seeing the vaccines until it's being approved by you all people, because you're the central heart of the entire the medication, entire viruses, vaccines, you name it, anything. You have a very, very bigger role. Dear students and all the delegates and all the faculty, please make use of this particular program. And from our sincere heart, I think we really thank all the speakers in particular. I think for accepting this particular program and giving your valuable time and giving your inputs to the all the delegates, all your rich experience will add a lot of flavor for this particular program. So once again, on behalf of St. Peter's and on behalf of organizing committee, I welcome all the delegates, and let us enjoy the session and let us learn their rich experience from the speakers, and let us be what you call a big team players in the upcoming vaccination. I think we are not going to see the world wars. I think you might be seeing for the last 1.5 years, it's all bio wars. People across the globe, I think they are going to play with these kind of viruses. They are going to play with the different kind of diseases. I think we have a bigger role to play, counter those attacks. It's not with the weapons, it's with the intellectual ideas, with the power of your mind. It's a power of your scientific temperament that you all people have it. The kind of research you do it, I think this GCP is going to good clinical practices. I think it is going to really help us. Dear delegates, I think let us get into the session, and I really thank for the organizers for giving me this opportunity, and all the best for the program. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your thought-provoking words. Now, I'd like to welcome Dr. P. Ranadir Chaudhary, Organizing Secretary, to enunciate about the webinar.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to greet all of you on this wonderful occasion for the international webinar on good clinical practices in clinical research. This webinar has been organized to inculcate the importance of good clinical practices and its principles in real-life settings. We have close to 900 registrations from more than 65 pharmacy and medical institutions across the nation. We have with us several delegates from industry, foreign universities in United Kingdom, Malaysia, and other parts of the world. We sincerely hope that our webinar will inspire the young minds to understand GCP guidelines and pursue a successful career in clinical research. With this brief introduction, I now hand over the session to Dr. Praveen, HOD of Pharmacy Practice, to introduce the first speaker and start the scientific session.
Thank you, Dr. Ranadir. It's my honor to introduce you Dr. M. Vijayanandi, Professor and Head, School of Pharmaceutical Sciences, Wales Institute of Science, Technology and Advanced Studies. She has completed her PhD from Tamil Nadu Dr. MGR Medical University in the year 2010. She has published more than 200 papers in reputed international journals and several patents and several book chapters to her credit. She has also been honored with honoris causa Doctor of Letters in the year 2018 for her teaching services. And she has been certified by UNESCO on UNESCO's Bioethics Chair on Good Clinical Practice Guidelines. So with this brief introduction, I would now welcome Vijayanandi ma'am to deliver her talk on roles and responsibilities of trial personnel and ethics committee members in clinical trials. Please, ma'am, you can start with the session.
Praveen, will you please allow in the next link also? Because one more link is there. Good evening, one and all. Thank you, Dr. for introduction about me. So kind of you. I thank the chairman, Dr. P. Jayapal Reddy, principal, Dr. P. Rajashekar, and St. Peter Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences for providing me an opportunity to explore about the topic mentioned. It's indeed my pleasure and honor to be a part of the international conference. I think it's the right time to talk about the clinical trials, since a lot of ongoing clinical studies about COVID-19 are reported by World Health Organization, both in national and international level. Let's move on the core of my today's topic. Role of clinical trial personnel and ethics committee in clinical research. Hope to make you to listen interestingly. Kindly post your questions for clarification if you think I can do it. Within the pharmaceutical and allied industries, there is a great need to search for new drugs. India is strategically located in the arena of global clinical research and trials. Approximately 477 COVID-19 trials were registered on India's clinical trial registry. Around 192 of these are observational studies, and at least 53 were of traditional Indian remedies and homeopathy. Many pharmaceutical industries in India are relocating their good manufacturing practice, manufacturing facilities, and utilizing the services of existing contract research organizations to preparing clinical trials. Within India, principal investigators are not only well-trained, familiar with the International Conference on Harmonization, good clinical practice guidelines, and other regulatory requirements. The rapid growth in the clinical research in India is evident according to McKinsey report, which stated that during the last 3 years, the clinical research industry in India has decreased from 200 million to 1 billion Indian rupee. Clinical trials holds enormous potential for benefiting patients, improving therapeutic regimens, and ensuring advancement in medical practice that is evidence-based. Next slide. Before we log into clinical studies, we should know about how the new drugs are discovered. There are 3 critical steps. Number 1 is a discovery step. The lead compounds are discovered. It may be of natural origin, synthetic, semi-synthetic, or even biotechnology processed. An optimization step, it involves the improvement of lead structure such as structural activity relationship, SAR, molecular mode of action, pharmacokinetic PK values, or assist. Development step, improvement of the PK properties and fine-tuning of the active substance, that is the investigational drug suitable for clinical trials. Next. New drug discovery and research begins in the laboratory with chemists, scientists, and pharmacologists, where the new chemical entities, NCS, synthesis were carried out. In vitro and in vivo screening and the toxicological studies were done, focused on various biological entities. It takes 3 to 4 years with 15% of the total cost of drug discovery and development. After this initial stage of research, new drug application, that is NDA, submission takes place for clinical research, that is clinical trials. It takes around 3 to 7 years and 60% of the total cost. It's evident that the clinical studies take more time as well as cost. Finally, Food and Drug Administration reviews, the new investigational drug, that is a regulatory process, takes place for 1 to 2 years, and then it enters the global market for clinical use. The drug discovery and development costs more than $500 million and international average time is 10 to 15 years. This is evident from the source of American Chemical Society. Next slide. While talking about clinical studies, it involves research using human volunteers, also called participants, that is intended to add to medical knowledge. There are 2 main types of clinical studies. Clinical trials, also called as interventional studies, which we are going to explore, and another one is observational studies. In observational studies, the investigators assess health outcomes in groups of participants according to a research plan or a protocol. For example, investigators may observe a group of older adults to learn about more the effects of different lifestyles on cardiac health. For examples, in a clinical trial, participant receives a specific intervention according to the research plan or protocol created by investigators. These interventions may be medical products such as drugs or devices, even procedures or changes to participants' behavior such as diet. Clinical trials may compare a new medical approach to a standard one that is already available or to a placebo that contains no active ingredients. The investigators try to determine the safety and efficacy of the intervention by measuring certain outcomes in the participants. Clinical trials used in drug development are sometimes described by different types of phases, depending upon the study. These phases are defined by Food and Drug Administration. Regulatory authorities. And we have seen about clinical trial and who is going to approve the clinical trials in India. The DCGI, that is the Drugs Controller of India. In the slide in the video shown by St.Peter Institute, I have seen the Drug Controller of India was in a glimpse of in picture. He's Dr. Somani. He's a DCGI, current DCH of India, Drug Controller of India, is responsible for the regulatory approvals for the conduct of clinical trials in India. In addition to the experts at DCGI office, they also avail the expertise of external experts and other government agencies like Indian Council for Medical Research, ICMR, Genetic Engineering Approval Committee, GEAC, Department of Biotechnology, DBT, and Atomic Energy Review Board, AERB. Additionally, approvals are required from the Director General of Foreign Trade, DGFT, for export of clinical trial samples, whole blood, serum, plasma urine to central laboratories located outside India. So on whole, we need approval from all these regulatory authorities whenever we are choosing a clinical trial. The regulatory authorities continues as this. The Central Drugs Standard Control Organization, CDSCO, under Director General of Health Services, Minister of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India, is a national regulatory authority of India. The headquarters is located in New Delhi. World Health Organization declares CDSCO as functional NRA, that is a national regulatory authority. CDSCO is accredited with quality management system by Bureau of Indian Standards. CDSCO is constantly thriving upon to bring out transparency, accountability, and uniformity in its service in order to ensure safety, efficacy, and quality of the medical product manufactured, imported, and distributed in the country. Under the Drugs and Cosmetic Act, CDSCO is responsible for approval of new drugs, conduct of clinical trials, laying down the standard of drugs, control over the quality of imported drugs in the country, and coordination of these activities of State Drug Control Organization by providing expert advice with a view of bringing about the uniformity in the enforcement of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. Further, CDSCO, along with state regulator, is jointly responsible for grant of licenses of certain specialized categories of critical drugs such as blood and blood products, IV fluids, vaccines, and sera. SUGIM is an e-governance system to discharge various functions performed by CDSCO under Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940. The software system developed is an online web portal where applicants can apply for NOCs, licenses, registration for ethical committee, permission and approvals. The Clinical Trial Register India, that is CTRI, hosted at the ICMR's National Institute of Medical Statistics, is a free and online public record system for registration of clinical trials being conducted in India that was launched on 20th July 2007. Initiated as a voluntary measure since 15th June 2009, trial registration in the CTRI has been made mandatory by the Drugs Controller General India, that is DCGI. Today, any researcher who plans to conduct a trial involving human participants is expected to register the trial in the CTRI before enrollment of the first participants. Submission of ethics approval and DCGL approval is essential for trial registration in the CTRI. International Clinical Trials Registry Platform, that is ICTRP, when there is a joint venture with India and other country. Multi-country trials, where India is a participating country which has to be registered in international registry, are also expected to register in the CTRI, that is Clinical Trials Registry Platform. In the CTRI, details of Indian investigators' trial size, Indian target sample size, and date of enrollment are captured. Clearance by local ethics committee, which we are going to see in detail in the next slides and all, is mandatory for all clinical trials, and the CTRI hopes that making disclosure of ethical clearance is mandatory field for registration. Who conducts clinical studies? This question arises in all of our mind. Every clinical study is led by a principal investigator who is often a medical doctor. Clinical studies also have a research team that may include doctors, nurses, social workers, and other healthcare professionals. Clinical studies can be sponsored or funded by pharmaceutical companies, academic, medical centers, voluntary groups, and other organizations, in addition to federal agencies. Doctors, other healthcare providers, and other individuals can also sponsor clinical research. Clinical studies can take place in many locations, including hospitals, universities, doctors' offices, and community clinics. The location depends on who is conducting the study. And what might be the reason for conducting clinical studies? In general, clinical studies are designed to add to medical knowledge related to treatment, diagnosis, and prevention of disease or condition. Some common reasons for conducting clinical studies include evaluating one or more interventions, for example, drugs, medical devices, approaches to surgery or radiation therapy, for identifying or diagnosing a particular disease or condition, treating a disease and/or a syndrome. Finding ways to prevent the initial development or recurrence of a disease or condition. These can include medicines, vaccines, or lifestyle changes, among other approaches. Examining methods for identifying a condition or the risk factors for that condition. And finally, exploring and measuring ways to improve the comfort and quality of life through supportive care for people with chronic illness. And coming to a core of the topic, who will be the clinical trial personnel? The clinical trial personnel includes investigator, sponsor, quality assurance staff, regulatory affairs staff, research coordinator cum assistant. The other staffs includes counselors, nurses, supervisors, pharmacists, and biostatistician. And what does the investigator actually does? Investigator is a person responsible for conducting a clinical trial. The leader of the team is called as a principal investigator. He is qualified by education, training, and experience to assume responsibility for proper conduct of the trial. Should meet all the qualifications specified by the applicable regulatory requirement and provide evidence of such qualification through up-to-date curriculum vitae. Familiar with the appropriate use of the investigational products as described in their protocol. Should be aware of and should comply with the GCP and the applicable regulatory requirements. And what would be the investigator responsibilities? He or she should permit monitoring and auditing by the sponsor and inspection by the appropriate regulatory authority, recruiting the required number of suitable subjects within the agreed recruitment period, complete the trial within the agreed trial period, ensure that all the persons assisting with the trial are adequately informed about the protocol, the investigational products, and their trial-related duties and functions. Approval from IRB or IEC, which we are going to see later. IRB is Institutional Review Board, and IEC means Institutional Ethical Board or Independent Ethical Committee. Should document and explain any deviation from approved protocol. Ensure that all investigational products are used only in accordance with the approved protocol. Informed consent of trial subjects. Should ensure the accuracy, completeness, legibility, and timeliness of data reported to the sponsor in the CRF, that is case report form, which is used for capturing data in clinical trials. The financial aspects of the trial should be documented in an agreement between the sponsor and the investigator or the institution. All SAEs, that is serious adverse events, should be reported immediately. Coming to the sponsor, and who will sponsor all these clinical trials if you are really interested or you are going to do? Sponsor is an individual, it may be company or institutional or organization, and responsible for, number one is initiation of the clinical trial, management of the whole study, financing the clinical trial, the study costs, etc., maintaining the quality assurance and quality control system with written SOPs to ensure that trials are conducted, generated, documented, and reported in compliance with the protocol GCP and applicable regulatory requirements. Coming to this quality management. Quality management plays a vital role in clinical trials. Quality management by the sponsor includes critical process and data identification. In general, critical data include the target parameters, serious adverse events, data for randomization and blinding, the availability of an informed consent, and the compliance with the patient's selection criteria. Risk identification, critical first step to avoid potentially harmful investigational study. Risk evaluation, to determine the significance of the risk potentially harmful. Risk control, to evaluate potential losses and take action to reduce or eliminate the harmful effects. Risk communication, the core of public health intervention in any disease outbreak and health emergency. It refers to the real-time exchange of information, advice, and opinion between experts. Risk review, to re-evaluate the risk events, relative probability, and impact done for better or for continuous improvement. Risk reporting, a systematic process for identifying and evaluating events that could affect the clinical study. Next, coming to quality assurance. Quality assurance staff is responsible for reviewing the protocol to check the inconsistency and problematic wording that will increase the likelihood of protocol violations. Reviewing monitoring reports of site visits to ensure that all identified issues are addressed in an appropriate and timely fashion or communicated to the investigative team. Conducting site visits on behalf of the sponsor whenever needed. Nowadays, there is an opener for MPharm regulatory affairs in clinical trial also. So the regulatory affairs staffs is responsible for writing the study informed consent documents, submitting the protocol, consent documents, and institutional review board IRB or the independent ethical committee documents, distributing the IRB approved protocol, consent documents, and institutional review board documents to participating research site to assist them in preparing IRB submission, preparing and distributing a checklist of items that participating sites must have, and providing regulatory guidance to the study sites as necessary. What does the research coordinator or the assistant do? The research coordinator or the assistant, their prime duties are ensuring that study data is accurately collected and reported, reporting any study or participant problems, maintaining regulatory files at the study site, working with the node quality assurance monitor and data management staff to identify, resolve data and reporting issues, interacting with study participants by performing assessments like addiction severity index and protocol procedures. What does the other staffs do? So the number one is the counselors. You all know they are a trained person to give guidance on personal or psychological problems, especially for the participants. Next, number two is supervisors, to supervise the work carried by technical staff, nurses to assist the doctor sometimes, and pharmacists. They play an integral part of the trial team, hold keys in case of blinded trials, and maintains all the drug therapy aspects of the study regarding dosage, possible adverse effects, etc. And finally, the biostatistician to ensure the study statistically. So we have seen about clinical trials and who are the trial personnel and what is what the qualification should be and the responsibility. And now we are going to another core topic, ethics committee. Ethics committee is an independent body constituted of medical, scientific professionals and non-medical, non-scientific members whose responsibility is to ensure the protection of rights, safety and well-being of human subjects involved in a trial. The ethical committee ensures a competent review of all ethical aspects of the project proposals and conducts this review in an unbiased and objective manner. There are two categories of ethical committee. One is Institutional Ethics Committee, IEC, in India is comparable to Institutional Review Boards, IRB, in the developed countries. Next one is Independent Ethics Committee. The IRB, it may be a board or committee or group formally constituted by the institution. IRB may be also called as Institutional Ethics Committee also. The another one is Independent Ethics Committee, an independent body which is not a part of the institution but which is owned by an individual or a group. For information, this RIPON, it is an independent ethics committee, the first ever digital ethical committee in Chennai, Tamil Nadu. RIPON IEC registered with CDSCO in the month of July 2018. So here you can see whoever is starting an ethical committee or whoever is interested, they should get registered with CDSCO priorly and own a registered certificate. Both the committee are constituted to review documents submitted for the conduct of clinical trials and to provide an opinion on research projects involving human subjects. What might be the roles and responsibilities of ethics committee? The core responsibility of IECs, we can just make it short, is to ensure a competent review of all ethical aspects of the research proposal and to conduct this review in an unbiased manner and free from any influence that could affect their objectivity. To protect the dignity, rights, and well-being of the potential research participants, to ensure that universal ethics values and international scientific standards are expressed in terms of local community values and customs, to assist in the development and education of a research community responsible to local healthcare requirement. By approving the conduct of the study, the IEC or the IRB provides assurance to the subjects and investigators that the study is scientifically sound, ethical, and meets the regulatory requirements. What will be the composition of the ethics committee? Who comes under this ethics committee? Who are all the members? Ethics committee should be multidisciplinary and multi-sectorial in composition. The ethical committee at any institution can have as its members individuals from other institutions or communities if required. There should be adequate representation of age, gender, community, etc. in the committee to safeguard the interests and welfare of all sections of the community or the society. Members should be aware of local, social, and cultural norms as this is the most important social control mechanism. Independence and competence are the two hallmarks of the ethics committee. And here we go. The ethics committee should be composed as follows. One chairperson, one member secretary, 1 to basic medical scientists. They may be a biochemistry or a pharmacology person, or 1 to 2 clinicians from various institutes, 1 legal expert or a retired judge, 1 social scientist, representative or non-government voluntary agency, 1 philosopher or ethicist or theologian, 1 layperson from the community. It's generally accepted that a minimum of 5 persons is required to compose a quorum. All decisions should be taken in meetings or not by circulation of project proposals. The chairperson of the committee should be from outside the institution to maintain the independence of the committee. The member secretary generally belongs to the institution. So here is a glimpse of thing. What is called in other specific region about this ethical committee. It's called as REC in the United Kingdom, a Research Ethics Committee, MREC in the Netherlands, and CPP in France, an Institutional Review Board in the United States of America, and Research Ethics Board in Canada. So it varies according to regions. Human Research Ethics Committee, HREC in Australia. Ethics Committee are also made a recommending international ethical guidelines for biomedical research involving human subjects, produced by the Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences. It is called a CIOMS, a body set up by the World Health Organization. The CIOMS guidelines have no legal force, but they have been influential in drafting of national regulation for ethical committee. So I think you'll have a view that how that ethical committee plays a major role in the clinical trials. Next, documents to be submitted to the ethical committee for approval. It's nearly 17 documents. I'm sorry I couldn't make it since all the points are very important. First thing is name of the applicant with designation. Generally, it's the principal investigator. Approval of the head department or institution is mandatory. Submission of the protocol and ethical issues in the study and plans to address these issues should be given. Proposal along with case report forms, questionnaire, etc. should be given. Informed consent forms in local language and the process. An investigator brochure should be added. Curriculum vitae of all the investigators. Suppose if it's a joint clinical trial, you have to give the curriculum vitae of all the investigators. Any regulatory clearance required, maybe from Director Control General of India or DGFT, that is Director General of Foreign Trade, Minister of Commerce in India, Government of India. Finance and funding requirements. It continues. Next is insurance, an agreement to report any serious adverse events, SAEs to IEs, statement of conflict of interest, agreement to comply with the relevant national and applicable international guidelines, a statement describing any compensation for study participation if, plans for publication of results, any other information relevant to the study. All the above documents to be submitted by B.Pharm, a Bachelor of Pharmacy or a Doctor of Pharmacy or Master of Pharmacy projects if done in human participants for obtaining approval from the ethical committee. Next. And some institutional ethical committee or independent ethical committees are more specific in the requirements and require additional documents such as back translations, verification of translation, usually informed consent forms as translated from English to other local languages. The translations are done by experts and verified by experts who are not involved in translation. Clinical trial agreement and indemnification letter, central laboratory details, and how will the ethics committee function? And here we go. Functioning of ethics committee involves resolving the ethical questions, taking care of the ethic principles, supporting researchers in ethical issues, compliance with all regulatory requirements and laws, analysis and approvals of research protocols. This is very important. Safeguard the rights and dignity of research subjects. CDSO gives a special importance to this. And reporting all serious adverse events, provide opinion on the compensation to the study subjects in case of injury or death. Generally, ethical committee meetings are scheduled at regular intervals or ad hoc basis. In most institutions, hospitals, the institution ethics committee meet once or twice a month. In government institutions or hospitals, the meeting frequency varies from 2 to 6 months, and in some institutions, the ethical meeting frequency depends on the number of protocols to be reviewed. Both approaches are in accordance with the SOP, which is generally specific to the institution. These SOPs are designed based on ICMR regulatory requirements. The EC meeting also gives assurance that ethics committee in India operate in accordance with ICH, GCP and other applicable laws and regulations. Let us know what is the ICMR has done as an initiative measure to improve this ethical committee. The ICMR is playing a crucial role in improving the status of the ethics committee in the country, laying foundation for improving the guideline even more to match the international standards. The ICMR has planned to establish a central ethics committee on human research to review and audit the functioning of ethical committees and to introduce a national accreditation system for ethical committees. ICMR, in collaboration with World Health Organization, DCGA office, and many committed professionals, has been conducting training programs for members of ethical committees across the country for updation. To summarize, drug discovery and development, drug discovery process was studied. Clinical trial, who conducts reasons to conduct the trial was mentioned. Clinical trial personnel, who are they, qualification and responsibilities have been shown. Regulatory authorities, the regulatory approval of the new investigational drug CDSCO, DCGI, CTRI, all trials should be rested. And I have given a brief thing about CDSO, DCGA, and CTRI, all these regulatory authorities in India. Ethics committee, the roles, responsibility, composition, and functioning were also seen. Coming to conclusion, there has been a huge growth in the number of clinical trials being conducted in India. Number of applications received by DCGI makes us evident that the clinical trial industry is growing in India. India is today identified as a major research center for conducting clinical trial due to its increased regulatory control. India's advantage over its counterparts are the availability of large multi-ethnic and patient population, rapid patient requirement, cost-effective location when compared to the Western countries, and well-trained investigators, all of it without compromise in quality. Keeping in mind the rapid growth in clinical trials, ethical committees and regulatory bodies in India have been streamlining the process to protect the well-being and the rights of the research participants. The sources for this presentations are from American Chemical Society, National Center for Disease Informatics and Research, the Indian Council of Medical Research, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, Drug Development Research Only Online Library, the World Health Organization, the Good Clinical Data Management Practices, the International Conference on Harmonization Guidelines. Acknowledgement. I wish to acknowledge Vistas, Wales Institute of Science, Technology and Advanced Study, my institution, and its management for providing space to explore my knowledge. I thank all my students without whom this would not be possible. Stay home, stay safe, and get vaccinated. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, madam. That was a wonderful session. Delegates, please post your queries in the comment section so that we can ask madam.
Yeah, I can see a
question. This delegate wants to know what are the career opportunities of PharmD in clinical research, madam?
Doctor of Pharmacy, PharmD are eligible for clinical research associate or coordinator, and several clinical research organizations, CROs, hire freshers as well as experienced PharmD candidates. So you have a better option in clinical research also.
Okay. And any other queries you can please post in the comment section. Yes, madam. We personally have some queries. We wanted to know whether do we need ethical committee approval for multi-center trials, or should we go with one ethical committee permission alone?
Pardon?
Do we need ethical committee approval for multi-center trials, or should we go with just one center trial alone?
Yes, ethical approval for each center is required. However, if it is a second center is within 50 kilometers of first center, then one may be sufficient. This is as per CDSCO requirement.
We have one more query. Do we need ethical approval if we are doing questionnaire-based study?
Yeah, yes, of course, we need ethical approval is required. Even the patient demographic is used for the study.
One more question. Do all studies need regulatory clearance?
When we go for the investigational drug, that is new drug, or it may be a new device or a new formulation, or it may be bioequivalence and bioavailability studies, require regulatory clearance. However, if it is an observational studies, you may not go for this regulatory clearance.
Okay. Any other queries are there? Please post in the comment section. The candidate wants to know what is the role of pharmacist in clinical trials.
Actually, I said this about in the personal trial personal also. Anyway, repeat. Pharmacists play an integral role or integral part of the trial team. They hold the key in the case of blinded trials and maintains all the drug therapy aspects of the study, of the whole clinical study.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, madam. If any other queries are there, we'll let you know. Thank you so much for your time and giving us a wonderful session on roles and responsibilities of trial personnel in.
Okay, thank you one and all.
Thank you. Now I request Ms. P. Anusha, Assistant Professor, St. Peter's Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences, to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jitendra Chimakurti.
Yeah. Good evening to all the delegates, faculty, and attendees who joined us. It's great pleasure for me to introduce our eminent speaker today for session 2. Dr. Jitendra Chimakurti, presently working as Professor, Principal, Faculty of Pharmacy in Vignan's Foundation for Science and Technology, Deemed University. Dr. Jitendra Chimakurti did his PhD from Acharya Nagarjuna University. Sir did his B.Pharm from Vinayaka Missions College of Pharmacy, Salem, and Masters from C.L. Bade Mehta College of Pharmacy, Chennai. Dr. Jitendra Chimakurti rendered his services as Assistant Professor in Department of Pharmacology and later as Associate Professor, Head, Department of Pharmacology from the same Bapatla College of Pharmacy till 2017. Dr. Jitendra Chimakurti areas of research interest include neuropharmacology and behavioral pharmacology. Sir has collaborative research include with Department of Chemistry of Geetham Institute of Technology and Department of Biotechnology with Acharya Nagarjuna University. Sir has got 13 international and 14 national publications, also has an experience in guiding 5 PhDs and 21 M.Pharm candidates. Sir also has attended international conference on European Scientific Center for Biological Markers. Today, we are so blessed to have Sir here and is going to take seminar on informed consent process and clinical trials. I request Sir to start the session. Thank you, Sir.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, the chairman of St. Peter's groups of institutions, the principal Rajshekar Garu, Praveen Garu, and Ranadir sir. I request someone of you could share my presentation, as I could not do it here.
Yes, sir. Just a second. So please start your session.
You can start slideshow.
Yes.
Dr. Praveen?
Yes, sir.
You can start slideshow.
Yeah, sure.
Good evening, one and all. I know that many of you won't be showing much interest, especially when the topic is something related to the regulatory aspects. Because we, as a non-English speaking nation, we are not so fond of reading such regulations anywhere. So even when buying an electronic gadget, we will never find time or show interest to read the instruction manual because it is in English. So in the same way, regulatory guidelines generally laid by many regulatory bodies also are having lots and lots of guidelines, and in most of the cases they are repetitive. Uh, though it appears to be so repetitive, it is very essential. So in this talk today, I will be covering this topic of good clinical practices, that is informed consent process. So as we all know, that informed consent process, and now I'll be discussing it as per the guidelines that are laid down by ICH. As you all know that ICH, it is an international conference on harmonization, which has been constituted to bring harmony along these research activities or any sorts of activities that are being performed, so that equality or harmony is being brought in the conduction of any activity. And ICH also has laid these guidelines for good clinical practices, and under that good clinical practices, it has given guidelines for each and every aspect that is to be followed in clinical trials. And today we will be discussing about the guidelines that are laid by ICH for this informed consent form or informed consent process. And the objectives of today's studies, we will be knowing about the importance of this informed consent form, the essential components of informed consent form, or how to make this informed consent process efficient, and various other aspects such as aspects related to the investigators, aspects related to the participants, and any other special circumstances of waiver of informed consent form and the documentation aspects. Next slide. So before going into this informed consent process, uh, first let us see the basic principles of good clinical practice. The primary intention of bringing this guidelines under this good clinical practice is to follow the ethics that are employed in research. We'll see why it is necessary. And one more thing is, before the initiation of any study, it is essential to assess the risk when compared to that of benefit. And if at all the risks are more than that of the benefit, it is not advised to start the study. So for whatever the reason the study is, we should be comparing the risk versus benefit before the initiation of the study. And regarding the participants, we should ensure that the rights of the participants, which means the subjects or the patients, the safety of the participants, and also the well-being of the participants has been taken care in all aspects of the study. And a very clear or confirmed both clinical and non-clinical information about the medicinal product that is being investigated has to be available and has to be presented to the review boards before the getting approval for this study. And the quality of the study has to be designed in such a way that it is foolproof and it is very robust. And once the study has been approved and has been initiated, it has to comply with the protocol that has been approved. So that compliance with the study protocol has also to be taken care during the time of the study. And any medical decisions, so pertaining to the subject or pertaining to the well-being of the patient, has to be taken care by the qualified physician at the right time at the earliest. And regarding the trial staff who are to be involved in this clinical trial, they should be qualified. And they should be qualified not only in terms of their education, but they also are to be qualified in terms of training and in terms of experience. So having education itself will not be sufficient. They should be adequately trained and adequately experienced to conduct this clinical trial. And informed consent process is one of the good principles. I mean, principles of good clinical practice, which we will be discussing later. And this clinical trial data should be recorded or handled and stored in such a way that it could be presented to any regulatory agencies, it could be re-verified, or it could be reassessed and interpreted whenever required. And the most important thing is confidentiality of the subject's participation and other information pertaining to the subject. All these things are to be maintained confidentially. Whereas good manufacturing practices also are to be maintained during the preparation of this investigational product, because this is going to be administered to the subject. So hence, good manufacturing practices are to be employed in the manufacturing of such medicinal. Whereas quality assurance, that is a robust system or procedures as per the protocol are being followed, that has to be taken care throughout this clinical trial. So these are the various principles of good clinical practice in a clinical trial. So let us see about this good informed consent process. So we are telling it as informed consent form and informed consent process. Generally, if I tell you something, you may assume it in some other way. And that is the biggest problem in communication, because it creates an illusion in you which might not be my intention. Hence, it is always essential in clinical trials to get a acceptance from the subject through a written informed consent form. So unlike a simple oral discussion, the written informed consent form has to be signed by the subject to participate in the study. Next. So in this study, we'll be knowing about why is this informed consent form necessary, who has to present this informed consent to the patient, who has to give this consent, when they should be giving, where they should be giving, what does it consist of, all such sort of things. Next. So generally, why is this informed consent form or process necessary is because we are having a very shameful history of unethical human experiments in previous times. For example, many other countries used to perform experiments in humans without concerning the ethics, without concerning the rights, the safety, or well being of the patient. You can see that in USA in the year 1932, the Tuskegee group of people in whom syphilis experiments are done by the United States Public Health Service, where 600 people were enrolled in this study, telling that they will be given health care by this US government. And without knowing, without being them aware of what they are subjected to, some about 399 people were infected with syphilis, and of the 600 people, 201 people were considered as control. And these studies continued for approximately 40 years, and without them undergoing the treatment. And the studies were being published widely in the medical journal. And in the same way, USA has infected some hundreds of mental patients in Guatemala with sexually transmitted diseases and has conducted the studies. And in Canada, many studies were done in children who were who were in residentials. So the nutritional supplements which are manufactured or which are discovered, these are administered to children in these residential schools. And recently, I think we have come across with the news that 750 graves of children were identified in a school campus. So such sort of studies were done unethically in Canada. And in Japan, there was a facility called as Unit 731, where they performed some vivisections, dismemberments or removal of limbs, and bacterial inoculations, and they induced epidemics in war prisoners. Germany also has done such experiments in prisoners, disabled people, and people in concentration camps. They exposed them to extreme temperatures, performing mutilating surgeries and injections with lethal pathogens. All such sort of studies were done without considering the safety or rights or well-being of the patient. So all these things have led the member countries of the world to come to a decision that such sort of unethical experiments are to be terminated in the humans. Hence, they have come up with such regulatory bodies which will devise the guidelines, and any studies are to be done as per the guidelines laid or accepted by this regulatory body. And when coming to this regulatory aspects, more than being regulatory, such experiments are to be considered in an ethical point of view, because these studies generally are involving humans. So, for example, you take the clinical trials of our vaccines for COVID-19. So, we are having some volunteers who are ready to take this vaccine. So, if at all such volunteers are not there, it is very difficult for us to study the efficacy or safety or toxicity of such vaccine. So, in such cases, when such volunteers are coming forward for the well-being of the society or well-being of a larger population, it is necessary for the investigators also to make sure that these studies are performed in an ethical, and we are calling it as an process for which we are getting the consent or acceptance from the participants, and after informing them about the study, and hence it is called as a informed consent process. And this is not a single step in the any clinical trial. So if it is a step for a milestone, it is a stage, then we can say it is an informed consent. That is one point in the clinical trial. But this is called as a process because it does not stop in the by getting the consent at the beginning of the study. So even during the study, if at all any changes are to be made in the study, so this changes are once again to be informed to the subject, and his acceptance has once again to be taken care. So this communication with the patient continues throughout the study, not only in the beginning of the study, throughout the study, and the patient has to give the consent before the study, and if any changes were there in the study, he has the option of opting out of the study. It is not necessary that if he has given the consent initially, he has to abide with that thing, and even though it is changing, he could not continue the study. He could withdraw from the study whenever he wants. So this informed consent process will ensure to protect the rights, safety, and well-being of the subject. So more than that, compared to that of investigating agency, this rights, safety, and well-being of the subjects are to be taken more are to be given more importance when compared to that of investigating agency. And we should also ensure that the subject is fully and accurately informed about what he is undergoing, whether he is, what all sorts of things he is undergoing, we'll be discussing. All such sort of things are to be informed to him very clearly. And this informed consent form, so in which the subject or the participant will give his consent, will get will have all the information about that particular state. Next slide. So this is what we call it as a process, because it is not a step. It starts and it continues throughout the study. And this document or informed consent form, it acts as a tool which involves all the requirements of the study. It it has information such as responsibilities of the subject. It has information about the risks and benefits to the participant, and it has other answers. Generally, the subject arises any queries. Next slide. So we will see what it has. All, as we have seen, that informed consent form, it has all the information about the study, all that risks or benefits, advantages, all sorts of things. All these procedures that are employed during this study are to be written in a simple language. And generally, this information that is present on this informed consent form, it should not contain any information that, so that the legal rights or the liability of the subject or any negligence that is being done by this investigator could be waived off. So their legal rights cannot be abolished. So that also has to be mentioned. And it should be clearly mentioned that the trial involves research. He should not feel that this is some established treatment and he is undergoing that established treatment. It should be clearly mentioned that the trial involves research and an investigational drug which has no proven therapeutic efficacy in humans. And there should be an explanation of the purpose of the trial. So, for what is this particular trial being conducted, whether for therapeutic activity or for pharmacokinetic activity or all sorts of bioequivalence or bioavailability sorts of things, or just any intervention in treatments, all such sort of explanation for the purpose of the trial also has to be mentioned in that consent form. And this consent form should have the duration of the subject's participation in the trial and description of the trial treatment, such as what is the frequency of uh, dosage, what is the duration of dosage, or what is the frequency of any sampling. All such sort of information also has to be there. Next slide. So generally, this form also has to include the subject's responsibility. So what the subject should do and what he should not do. So apart from the responsibilities of the investigator, the subject's responsibilities also are to be included so that his activities will not interfere with the study results. And that particular part of the trial, which is experimental and which is not what we can say established, and in which he involves getting administered any new investigational drug or any sampling, all such sort of thing has to be clearly demarcated, and the risks or inconveniences that might be caused to the subject also has to be mentioned in the consent form, and the benefits to the subjects also are to be available in the consent form. And he should also be informed about the risks, benefits, and any other alternative treatment procedures for this particular treatment that is being given in that particular clinical trial. Especially, this is essential in the case of patients as participants, because in some cases patients might there is a chance of therapeutic misconception or therapeutic misestimation that is being considered by a patient, which we will be seeing later. So in such sort of things, he should be aware of alternative treatment methods or procedures for that particular ailment. And this form also should consist of information about the compensation that he is uh, be getting in the case of any uh, unprecedented, or we can say unexpected uh, effects of that particular trial. So such compensation also has to be mentioned. What is the payment he will be given has to be mentioned. What are the anticipated expenses during the trial or after the trial, which are to be borne by the subject, are also to be mentioned in this informed consent. And this subject should know that this participation in the study and also the continuation in the study is voluntary, and there should not be any coercion. So it should be purely based on his will that he is participating in the study, and it is not mandatory. The subject should be clearly aware of. And access of this information to any authorized regulatory bodies also is should be given whenever it is required, and subject also has to be uh, informed that such information will be made available to the regulatory agencies in the case of any uh, inquiries or inspections. Whereas confidentiality of the subject's participation and subject's information also has to be maintained, and this has to be mentioned in the informed consent form that it will be taken care that his information will be confidentially maintained. And during the process of this clinical trial, if at all the investigator finds any changes are to be made in the study, he has a chance, or he could review, he could make a change, make any such sort of changes in the course of treatment or sampling and all. And these changes are once again to be approved by the institutional review board or independent ethics committee board, and the same has to be updated to the subject, and a consent for this updated information should once again be sought by the from the subject here. And the contact information for any abnormal uh, effects, if at all, if the subject experiences, or if he wants to get more information regarding the study, he should be given the contact information of the investigator, of the physician, or the trial staff who will be involved in this particular study. And any unprecedented termination, means termination in the sense, for example, if you are terminating the study, so in such cases, what are the consequences that the subject will be subjected to, or compensation that has to be given, or any treatment measures that are to be continued, all such sort of information also should be available in this informed consent form. And he also should be informed about the number of participants along with him, how many of them will be participating in the study. And one more thing, that this copy of informed consent form that has been signed by the subject is once again given to the subject. So that thing also should be informed. That it should be mentioned that I have received the copy of this signed informed consent. It's like, and so those are the very basic essentials of any informed consent form. And now we will see who has to inform this information. And we have divided this informed consent process into three. One is informing, and the other is getting consent, and the third thing is it is a process. And now we'll see who will be informing. So this, all this information, generally which we have discussed in the previous slides, it has to be informed orally in an understandable language to the subject, and it should be informed by the principal investigator or any other person who is appointed by the principal investigator, or a co-investigator, or any appropriately qualified person, or the agent of the sponsor or the institution with adequate medical knowledge, and who can understand the potential adverse effects of the study, and those who is familiar with the protocol and who is a part of this clinical trial uh, could be informing this. So, though any other person who is appointed by the principal investigator or any other person is informing about this information to the patient or to the subject, the responsibility, it lies with the principal investigator. Next slide. And getting acceptance, especially from the patient. So we know that clinical trials generally it involves either a subject might be healthy volunteers or it might be patients. And recruiting a patient is not similar to that of recruiting a healthy volunteer. And generally in this recruiting a patient, the physicians play an important role. And these physicians should be elaborating the patient to avoid therapeutic misconception or therapeutic misestimation. So therapeutic misconception in the sense, they should not feel that this treatment that is being given is having a beneficial effect. Because since the drug which is being tested in such patients, it is an experimental or investigational drug in which the efficacy is questionable. So in such cases, he should not feel that this is some therapeutic drug and with which his disease will be treated. So that is therapeutic misconception, and therapeutic misestimation is something he feels that this particular drug will be more effective than what he is generally undertaking or which is generally available for his disease. So both such sort of misconceptions or misestimations can be or should be avoided, and this could be elaborated only by the physician who is a part of the trial. So this informed consent acceptance by the patient, it requires an additional step that the physician should be elaborating here. Next thing is, who can give the consent? In general, any subject who is above 18 years and who is having a sound physical or mental ability, they can give the consent or acceptance for being a part of that particular trial. And in some cases, if the subject could not be able to give the consent, so in cases where he could not read, or if the patient or the subject is unconscious, if they are mentally sick or mentally ill, all in such cases they could have a legally acceptable representative who could give the acceptance or consent on behalf of the subject. And in some special circumstances, there is a chance or there is a provision that an impartial witness who is not a staff or a of this clinical trial, they could act as a who they could give the consent in terms of their in terms of in the place of subject or in the place of subjects legally acceptable representative. We will see about those conditions. And in the case of, in some cases, we are having some subjects who are very vulnerable, and we will see who all comes under this vulnerable category. And audio video recordings of this informed consent process means that the principal investigator is elaborating about this contents of the informed consent to the subject or to the legally acceptable representative, and getting their consent. All these things can be recorded, and this video recordings can be saved for further uh, presentation to any regulatory agencies. And during this process itself, all the questions and concerns of the subject are to be answered by this principal investigator or the physician in the case of patient. Next slide. And we have seen that in some special circumstances where either the subject could not give his consent, or the subject or the legally acceptable representative both could not be able to understand what is there in this consent form. So in such cases, we can have this impartial witness or that legally acceptable representative. Especially in the case of children, generally their parent or any legal guardian can give this consent in terms of the on behalf of children. Whereas if the subjects are the legally acceptable representatives, if they cannot read but they can understand, or the people who do not speak native language, in such cases they should have some translators who could make it clearly understandable to the patient. Or in those subjects who are having hearing impairment or vision impairment, and who are physically unable to sign, who are cognitively impaired or mentally disturbed, who are economically or educationally disturbed. So in all such cases, they should have a legally acceptable representative. Or if the legally acceptable representative also could not be able to uh, give his consent on behalf of the subject. In such cases, the impartial witness comes into picture. Next slide. So this impartial witness, generally he should be independent of the trial. Means he should not be a part of this trial staff, or generally he, what is this? He will not be a part of the trial throughout this process. He should be independent of the trial, and he should be involved in the process only if the subject or the subject's legally acceptable representative cannot read or cannot understand. In such cases, this impartial witness, he will read the informed consent form and any other written information that in the patient information sheet and all, and he also will give his signature along with the legally acceptable representative. Next slide. And we have in the previous presentation, we have seen that the role of institutional review board and independent and ethics committee. Generally, before the start of the trial, these people, they are involved in evaluating the quality of the protocol, the ability of the investigator, and the facility that it is available so that for the conduct of the study. Apart from this, they also will approve this informed consent form that is prepared as a part of getting approval. And this informed consent form, they should be ensuring the protection of the rights, safety, and well-being of the patient. And they also will be approving the patient information sheet, and any updates in the process of this during the trial, any changes are to be made to the trial procedures. So these also are once again to be modified. They are to be updated to the IRB. Once again, consent, approval has to be taken from them, and once again it has to be informed to the subject. Consent has once again to be taken from this subject. Next slide. And during this review by the institutional review board, there's a few problems generally they arise, especially in the informed consent form. Here, the information that is presented in the informed consent form should be able to, should be in a very simple language. So in some cases, medical terminology can be used, will be used, or in some cases, some difficult procedures will be mentioned where a normal average person cannot be able to understand. So the institutional review board will once again ask them to make it more simple, and some typographical or grammatical errors. And in some cases, all procedures might not be included, which might be considered as normal or simple procedures. So those also are to be included. And the risks that the subject will be experiencing might not be appropriately mentioned. So such sort of errors, or the benefits to the patient or to the subject, might be overstated by the investigator, or the person or the subject is not being told that he is a part of research. He is participating in a research. So it is very essential that the subject should know that he is being experimented upon. So that particular statement also should be there in the consent form, and he should know that he is participating in a research of any investigational, in any new drug or any new procedure. Next. And this presenting the consent form, or informing the subject about the trial to the subject or to the legally acceptable representative or to the impartial witness, it has to be done as per the plan that is being suggested and got approved by the institutional review board. And it should be done, the consent form has to be provided to the subject before the recruitment interview or personal interview or something, so that he could have adequate time to read the contents, and it should be in an understandable language. Generally, the interview in such cases, it should be clear in a simple language, and based upon the level of the education of the subject, the contents are to be very clearly uh, spoken, orally told to the subject, and in a comfortable setting, and answering all the concerns or questions of the participants, so that to ensure that he is confident with all the procedures, he knows that he is a part of a research, he knows that he might not be benefited, or he knows that he might be harmed. All such sort of things are to be clearly elaborated during the uh, interview, and the subject should be given adequate time to give his consent. It is not like in a one-to-one interview, he should listen and immediately he should give his consent. He should be given adequate time so that the subject can think of it. He can discuss it with any other friends or relatives, and once again come back and be a part of the study. And it is very essential for the subject to know that he can withdraw from the study at any point of time. So that also has to be clearly elaborated to the subject in this informed consent process. Next. And as I have told, he could be, no one could force him to be a part of the study, or no one could force him to continue in the study. So it is purely voluntary, and the subject should know that it is purely voluntary, and he could withdraw at any point of the time if at all he finds it to be not suitable to him. So no investigator or trial staff or agents of the investigating agency facility, no one should have any right to force the patient to both enroll in the study and also to continue in the study. Next slide. And in special cases, there is a chance that this consent form can be waived off. So this can be waived off in such cases if the study involves no greater than minimal risk, or if the rights and welfare of the subject would not be adversely affected, or if the research could not be carried out without a waiver, or if the subjects will be informed about any information regarding the study uh, without getting any consent form signed by them. And such sort of studies should once again be got approval from the IRB that this consent form will be waived off in this study. So in these conditions, we can waive off the getting acceptance in a written consent form. And the last thing is documentation. It is always essential, and which we are very poor at. All these consent forms that are approved by the IRB, that are presented to the patient, to the subject, that are signed by the subject. It means the subject copies. Subject copies also are to be uh, documented along with the originals in which the subject is signed, and the subject copy will be there that I have received this thing. That subject copies also are to be documented, and these are to be filed in such a way that they are separated for each and individual trial. And once again, the reviewed consent form during the process of the trial, that also can be documented separately, and all these things are to be presented to any regulatory agencies whenever it is required. This is regarding the informed consent form, or we can say informed consent process. Well, thank you. And any questions?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your wonderful session, sir. Audience, you can please post your queries in the comment section. So we have few queries. Do informed consent be compulsorily in native language?
Yes, yes, it is compulsory in their native language.
If the studies are done in emergency or unconscious cases, do we need informed consent consideration?
Informed consent form should be given by the subject's legally acceptable representative.
Okay. Do we need informed consent for retrospective studies?
It is not necessary, but in the initial studies itself, it is always necessary to include such statements that so that this data can be used for further studies, because we cannot get the consent for retrospective studies because we cannot find these participants. They will not be located in any fixed place. We could not get the consent, so that retrospective studies in most of the cases it does not require any.
Okay, sir. And for a questionnaire-based survey, do we need informed consent?
No, it does not require.
Okay, sir. Sir, I think that's all about the questions, sir. Thank you very much for spending your time with us, sir. We hope to meet you
Thank
soon. Thank you, sir. Now, that was a very delightful third session. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Shivani Raula, Assistant Professor, St. Peter's Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences, to introduce our third speaker, Dr. M.G. Rajanan, to the audience.
Good evening, all, and thank you, Dr. Praveen sir, for giving me this opportunity. Sorry. I'm so happy and delighted to introduce our next speaker of the session, Dr. M.G. Rajanand. Currently, he's working as assistant professor from Sri Ramachandra Institute of Pharmacy. Sir has more than 10 years of experience in teaching. He has completed his PhD from SRM College of Pharmacy in the year 2015. Uh, he he has more than 75 publications from the national and international journals, which include Medscape, Scopus Index journals, Web of Science, and and he has two book publications. He has received grants from government, from state and central government. With this short introduction, I would like to welcome sir to the session. Handing over to you, sir.
Good evening, sir. Please start your session.
So good evening, Praveen. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, presentation is visible.
Yes, sir, visible.
Can I proceed?
Yes, sir, please.
Yes, thanks for the introduction. So now let us go into the topic. So we are going to discuss today about GCP guidelines and its importance in clinical trial. So for the next 30 minutes, we are going to see what is good clinical practice and why it is important, what are all the goals of good clinical practice, and what are the foundations for GCP, that is how we got the guidelines, and what are all the principles of GCP and how we are applying in clinical trial, and what is the need for undergoing GCP training. So first, what is good clinical practice? So good clinical practice is an international standard. So it is an international standard. So it is not made by the country. It is globally anyone. So whoever is doing research, they have to follow this. It is an international standard. So it is an international standard for what? It is an international standard for ethics and international standard for scientific quality. So we talk in terms of international standard of both ethics and scientific quality. to conduct research on human participant. So whenever we do research on human subject, so we need to follow certain international guideline, international standard. One is ethics standard, another one is scientific quality standard. So this is about what is good clinical practice. And where does GCP stands in a clinical trial? So the GCP stands in a clinical trial starting from the designing of a protocol, doing the experiment, monitoring, recording, analyzing the data, documentation, and reporting to the regulatory authority or wherever is. So in all these area, good clinical practice is playing a role. It is not only just writing a protocol and getting ethics approval that you are going to do as per a GCP, and after approval you can do whatever you wish. So it is not. So GCP is standing in everywhere in all steps of clinical trial. We are going to follow the good clinical practice guideline. So why GCP is important? Because when I am doing a clinical research, I am following the GCP guidelines protocol, meaning that I am giving the right safety and well-being of the trial subject. So the right safety and well-being of the trial subjects are protected when someone is following GCP standard guidelines in a clinical trial, and as well as it ensure the creditability and accuracy of a clinical trial generated during clinical trial. So just following ethics alone will not be sufficient. So by doing clinical research, we should bring something new, and we should have some scientific merit in a clinical trial. Those scientific data. So how can I trust the data? So how can one just go with the report generated by the data? So that scientific creditability and accuracy of the clinical data is based on if someone is following the GCP guideline. So how can one achieve this? So the complaints can be achieved through guidelines and regulations established by regulatory authority. So guidelines and regulation. So we have guidelines. The country to country we have different guidelines, and we have to follow those guidelines. And we have regulators. So we have DCGA, we have ICMR, we have FDA. So all those regulations we have to follow. So just by following the guidelines given by the country, and by following the regulations or standards or the laws given by the regulatory authority, we can do this. And standardized protocol given by the sponsor in case of clinical trial. So by just by following these things, we can able to compliance with the clinical standard. So what are the goals of GCP? So now how to safeguard the right safety and well-being of the trial subject, and credibility and accuracy of trial data. So how it can be safeguarded? So there for this safeguarding we have two pillar of protection in any biomedical research involving human subject. So one is informed consent process, another one is independent review. So these two topics are right now taken by the two previous speakers. So they have covered the importance of getting informed consent process whenever we do clinical trial, as well as importance of getting independent or institutional ethics committee approval. So when someone is applying their protocol to ethics committee and presenting in front of committee, and committee is giving clearance, so that is one way that we are following the standard guidelines, and it is also going to give the assurance that we are going to give the or we are going to protect the right safety and well-being of the trial subject, as well as by getting informed consent. So these are all the two pillars of protection. So now what are the foundations for GCP? So here I am going to talk about a few history, what happened. Today now we have well established GCP guideline and how these guidelines are made. So for that some we have to go to history some 100 years back in 1906. So US Food and Drugs Act came. So how this act came? So those times we had drugs which was there in the market in the names called Cups, Baby's Friend, and Grandma's Secret. So in these name, the drugs are available in the market without showing what is the content inside. So we never know what are all the ingredient present. Just grandma's secret they are giving. So by giving this syrup, the children are sleeping well. So we are just wondering about grandma's secret medicine, but we never know that these preparations were made with the opiums, and it had morphine. So by giving this, children are sleeping. So we came out that there are all some forgery, and the Act, U.S. Food and Drugs Act, so in which was implemented in 1906, it is the first landmark in the regulation of the drugs, that if any food and drug supplies are being transferred across interstate, they must have clear label instruction like what content in the product. So they just first the regulation of the drug came that we should have labeling. A drug should have what are all the ingredient, not only the active pharmaceutical ingredient, but also we should have other ingredient. So nowadays you can see any preparation, we have the preservatives or anything, whatever is used for the preparation or formulation. Now everything we have the clear label instruction. So that was the first regulation of the drug. So then in 1937, we had a disaster called elixir sulfanilamide disaster. So what is sulfanilamide? So sulfanilamide was given frequently for the treatment of streptococcal infection. So now what happened, the pharma people or the representative, they were just telling that they want this preparation in syrup form so that they can give it to children, because those days we had only tablet forms of sulfanilamide. We don't have syrup form of sulfanilamide. So they wanted to convert the tablet form into the syrup form. So for that, they try to dissolve the sulfanilamide into suitable solvent, and unfortunately it is not soluble in many of the solvent, and finally they dissolved the sulfanilamide drug into the solvent diethylene glycol. So the diethylene glycol was a very toxic substance. It was generally used in car radiators as antifreeze during winter. But unfortunately, this solvent was used to dissolve sulfanilamide, and thereby they added other coloring agents, sweetening agent, because we are going to give it to children. So just to make them compliance, so they have just added a very good appealing color and odor, all those, and the formulations was dispatched all over the country. So by taking this, so that many children did, they had kidney failure because of the toxic compound diethylene glycol. So nowadays it is very easy to spread the news. So just when the government is making an order, next minute we are seeing everything in break news and it is coming to our WhatsApp. But in those period in 1937, we don't have such a facility. Only we had radio, like very few things. That too, not everybody is listening to radio for 24 hours. So that time, before the information is reaching to the people to withdraw the drug, it has been dispatched to many people, and many children had kidney failure, and many children did. So that was the one disaster happened in 1937, and as a result, they brought the Food and Drugs and Cosmetic Act in 1938. So here, how come the cosmetic also added? So further, we have another example here. The lash luray is the eyeliner. So this eyeliner was having the content of paraphenylene diamine. So this paraphenylene diamine, which is present in this eyeliner, it caused blindness to the ladies who used this. So they had already in 1937, just 1 year before, they already had a bad experience of a drug causing the kidney failure and the children's death, and again they had a cosmetic preparation causing blindness. So by covering these drugs and cosmetic, they brought a guideline in 1938 with the Drug and Cosmetic Act. So the act here, they specify the safety of drugs should be demonstrated before their market approval. So just like that, they prepared sulfanilamide by mixing with a suitable solvent, and they just marketed. And the lash luray also, it was just marketed, but the safety was not checked. If they already checked the safety, then this could have been not undergone into the market, and many people might not experiencing the bad side of the nature of the drug. So the Drugs and Cosmetic Act is specifying that every drug should be demonstrated before their safety should be demonstrated before their market approval. So then after nearly 10 years, we had in 1947 Nazi physician trials. So here what happened? So in Germany, the prisoners of war camps were experimented in the name of science. So they, in the name of science, the doctors were doing all cruel, unethical experiment on the poor prisoners. So what type of experiment they were doing? So you can see in the first diagram that someone is kept into high altitude pressure chamber, and they are seeing at what attitude, pressure he is dying. And in the second picture, you are seeing that two doctors are observing that the prisoner is put into ice cold water, and they are trying to see what is the freezing point, at what time, at what temperature the prisoner is dying. So they just wanted to know the freezing point of blood. So for the name of in the name of science, they were doing all unwanted, unethical trial. So not only these two, and also they were creating gunshot wound, and they are seeing how far the infection is happening, and they even transplanted graft among twins to see the body's response. So all unethical research, whatever they wanted to do, they just did as per their wish. So unfortunately, the end of all this experiment is death. All the prisoner who are all being taken for this research, everybody finally they did. So that has made a very big revolution in the among the other peer groups of other research people. So they condemned the government. They told that we cannot do such a unethical and cruel experiment in the name of science. So as a result, in 1948 we had Nuremberg Code. So the Nuremberg Code specified 10 important points. That is the first cornerstone, fixing that there should be some set of guidelines should be made before someone is doing a clinical research. So out of the 10 points set in the Nuremberg Code, the number one point is voluntary consent must be obtained. So any subject, whenever we do research, we should ask them whether are you interested to be a part of the research. The moment they say they are not interested or not willing, we should not compel them. So that is the for most important decision taken in the Nuremberg Code in 1948. So after this, after 10 year, again we had another set of tragedy. Even though the Nuremberg Code is specifying that we have to get informed consent, still many people are not doing that. And in 1957, we had a thalidomide tragedy. So the thalidomide, the drug was given to pregnant women to prevent their early morning vomiting, motion sickness problem. So it was used off label. So thalidomide was not for that purpose. It was for the treatment of multiple myeloma cancer and etc. But it was given off label to pregnant women. So pregnant women, they took this drug, and their vomiting sensation were also controlled. But what happened when they deliver the baby? They all delivered focomelic baby without limbs, so as you see in the in the picture. So they delivered nearly some 10,000 children were born without limbs due to the drugs thalidomide. So it is not one or two, 10,000, a huge number. So this has again made the revolution. And in 1960, as a result of all this tragedy, we had Kebafur Harris Amendment. Here they told that preclinical toxicological testing is important before one goes to human. So now you know anyone now once you go to Google and browse about how to perform toxicity testing, now you are all having all this set of guideline. Like we have to do chronic toxicity testing, mutagenicity, carcinogenicity, teratogenicity, reproduction and development, under which we have segment 1, segment 2, 3, many guidelines are there. So how we have these guidelines? So now we have these guidelines because of all the tragedy which we have seen so far. So now if suppose these guidelines were there before, those 10,000 children's without limbs, the focomelic babies would have been not. So why that was? Because we did not have such a good guideline. But nowadays it is not possible. Any drug, before we go to clinical, we must to check for the teratogenicity, that is a problem to the next generation, and the reproduction and development. All those has to be carried out. And now we are going to see a very important milestone in the history. So the declaration of Helsinki. So how the declaration of Helsinki happened? So Helsinki is just a place. So Helsinki is the capital of Finland. That's all. Helsinki is a place. So what happened in the place? So in the place, what happened? Few doctors, they joined together, and they started writing a document how a clinical trial should be conducted. And those doctors were named as World Medical Association, and they released the first revision in 1964 in the place Helsinki. So it is named Declaration of Helsinki. So this document must be read by everyone, whoever is doing research, and this can be easily downloaded at free in the website you are seeing at World Medical Association WMA.net. So here you can go and download the full version of a Declaration of Helsinki. So anyone, whoever is involved in doing research, they are expected to read this. The first version is released in 1964 in Helsinki. Then we had many revisions. Now the latest revision which we are all following is the revision, seventh revision happened in 2013 in Brazil, is the current existing guideline which we are following. So even though we had a declaration of Helsinki which clearly specified the doctors, group of doctor called World Medical Association, the people have clearly described how to do a clinical research. A document was made. In spite, they have observed another tragedy. So in 1932 to 1972, during this 40 years of a period, they were doing a study called Tuskegee syphilis study. So what is unethical here? So the Beecher, so he is a US anesthetist. So he is Beecher. So he published a paper in 1966 in New England Journal of Medicine about on the topic ethics and clinical research. So he has just done a systematic review of the existing article and two published medical studies presenting risk to subject without their knowledge of approval was brought into the picture. Out of two published article he has chosen for the review, the most important study he quoted is a Tuskegee syphilis study. So in Tuskegee syphilis study, the syphilis patients were enrolled in the year 1932, and they were given with a placebo drug. That is, the subjects, they doesn't know that they are not given treatment for syphilis. They were under impression that the doctors are giving medicines to him and he is following, but the people doesn't know that they are the placebo control people. They were not given with any treatment. So what happened? They were in this study, 28 deaths were there, and 100 cases of disability was reported, and 19 cases of congenital syphilis were also noted. So why all this happened? Because lack of informed consent. The subject was not informed that he is put into placebo control where there is no active pharmaceutical ingredient, and putting subject and their families to risk, because the study was started in 1932. So 40 years they were doing study, but what happened, nearly in 1960s we had the drug penicillin. So the penicillin was discovered during the period of study when penicillin was reported for the treatment of syphilis. Since these patients were there in the study, they have not given the penicillin. If they, that is called withholding the information. So information of syphilis management was there, but those informations was not given or not brought to the knowledge of the participant. So it is called deception. It is a way of cheating the participant. So exploitation of vulnerable population, deception, withholding information, no benefit to subject. So all these were underlined, and again the evolution started, and they said this is not a good way of doing a research, that the participant is not being informed what he is being given. So as a result, in 1979 we held a Belmont report. So here the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subject of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, in 1979 they released a Belmont report. So where we are talking about three important things like respect for person, beneficiaries, and justice. Respect for person. So what is this? So here we acknowledge that the participant, we should ask, are you willing to be a part of the study? That is the basic respect. So now my student is doing something without my knowledge. What does it mean? He don't have respect on me, because if he has respect he will consult with me, isn't it? So the not asking and doing something means it is irrespect. So the respect for person in terms of clinical research is asking consent is the basic respect which we have on the participant. And another thing is beneficiaries. Whenever we do research, we should justify the benefit risk ratio, and the benefit should be more than the risk. Then only study can be carried out. And justice. So fair treatment, like randomization and not putting subject one group purposefully into problematic and favoring one group. So not doing all this, and fair treatment of handling the trial subject. So all these three important criteria was set in the Belmont report. So these are all the various history. We are seeing how the guideline is coming one by one to follow good clinical practice. So and then what happened in 1981, the FDA guidelines on GCP was released, and then UK started releasing their own guideline, and Japan started releasing their own guideline. So now what happens? Suppose someone is doing a research in UK for the manufacturing and marketing a drug. So they have to follow UK regulations and do research. For the same drug, if they have to do it they have to market in US. Now the US government is asking them to repeat the same research as per their regulation. Similarly, if they want to do it in Japan, Japan is demanding them to do the research as per their regulation. So the country to country, we have different regulations. But even though the guidelines or regulations are different, actually all of them are talking about only one issue, that is ethics and scientific quality. So whenever we do research, the ethics must be followed, and the data what we generate should have a scientific credibility. So all are talking on same issue, but then why should we have different guideline? So a decision was taken to consolidate all this guideline into one universal guideline to be used globally. So that is called good clinical practice. In 1996, we had this guideline. So now I just bringing back the first slide. What I said, it is an international standard. Now I believe you all understand the meaning how the international standard has come here, because before every country had their own regulation. So to avoid this, because it is not found to be a good way of doing research, uh, because everyone are talking about only one issue but in different guideline or regulation. So to put everything into together, we had an international standard, so that we can mutually share the data. What I do in one country can be taken or considered by other country, because both the countries are doing under same regulation. So GCP is an international standard for ethics as well as for scientific quality to conduct research on human participants. So now I believe you understand what is GCP and the origin, how we had the guidelines which we are having. Well established guideline today is because of many tragedy which we came across in the previous. So the participant of these guidelines were representatives of authorities and pharmaceutical companies from Europe, Japan, and US, as well as those of Australia, Canada, and Nordic countries and WHO. So the guideline was approved on 17 July 1996 and implemented for clinical trial from 17 January 1997, but it was not enforced by law, because we generally, when something is law only we do. If we don't wear mask, we will be given with the penalty. The government made as a law, then we wear, otherwise we don't wear. So our attitude mind is like this. So in first time when they implemented a GCP guideline, it was not a law, so many people did not follow. But now later they made it is mandatory or compulsory that people whoever do clinical trial, now it is as per law, we have to follow good clinical practice guideline. So the ICH GCP we are talking. So the ICH is unique in bringing together the regulatory authority and pharmaceutical industry to discuss scientific and technical aspect of pharmaceuticals and develop ICH guidelines. So especially US, Japan, and European Union, they all joined together and they made this. And here we have different segment. We have different guidelines for quality, safety, efficacy, and multidisciplinary guidelines are available, of which the good clinical practice is one among. And in good clinical practice, we have various section like the glossary, the principle, institutional review board, the roles and responsibilities of investigator in a clinical trial, similarly responsibilities of sponsor in a trial, how to write a protocol and what are all the procedure to do protocol amendment, what is investigator brochure, and what are all the essential document for the conduct of clinical trial. So these are all 8 different section we have in the ICH GCP. So I believe in which the informed consent and institutional review board we already covered by our previous speakers, and today I am here to discuss only about the principles of ICH GCP guideline. So in this guideline, we have 13 rules. So 13 guidelines are there in under ICH GCP principles. So the first one is the clinical trial should be conducted in accordance with ethical principles that have origin in Declaration of Helsinki. So I told you already that anyone whoever is interested or whoever is involved in doing clinical research, they must go and download from the website World Medical Association and read the Declaration of Helsinki, and whatever we do that has to fall under the guideline consistent with the good clinical practice and applicable regulatory authority. Because now we do research in India, we must follow Indian Council of Medical Research ICMR guideline, we have to follow. So similarly, what guidelines to be followed for other countries, so everything is put together and given in a single document called Declaration of Helsinki. So where do we apply this in a clinical trial? So the principle one, ethical conduct, is applied through design and approval of the protocol. So we are writing a protocol and presenting to ethics committee. So the committee is there to take over, to take care of all parts of the protocol. Because knowingly or unknowingly, sometimes we may be going with a wrong methodology. So I believe nobody will purposefully go with a wrong methodology or unethical methodology. So if in case unknowingly we are going also, the committee is there, because committee is constituted with all eminent people who are all having experience in clinical trial. So those committee people now, they are there to safeguard you, as well as the committee is there to safeguard the participant whom we are going to include in the study. So this ethical conduct, now we are applying the first rule of GCP by presenting the protocol to the ethics committee and having informed consent. Sometimes we have ethics committee, whereas in some institute we have um, SAC, Scientific Advisory Committee. So any committee we have to present, and a favorable risk and benefit ratio should be calculated. The benefit should be more than the risk, and fair and transparent procedure and outcome in the selection of research subject, and compliance with the national and international laws, regulation, and standard. Because now, nowadays when we are going publication also in methodology, we have been asked to mention about our ethics committee approval number, and if it is a trial, we have been asked to mention about CTRI registration number. Nowadays, before few years back it was optional, but now it is mandatory. CTRI number is not there, we cannot submit the manuscript to journal at all for evaluation. So now the guideline is enforcing us to do all this. So the second guideline in GCP is, before a trial is initiated, anticipated benefit for trial subject, if not directly to the trial subject, at least to the society, isn't it? So now we are in the COVID pandemic situation. So we are in doing, we are in the need of discovering a new drug or vaccine for the disease. So some participant, we are taking them and we are giving them a new vaccine. So suppose the vaccine is not effective, so the participant is not benefited, but the data what we get from the participant, we are all benefited, because we are doing trial, it is not effective, so we are not giving to other participant. So by being a part of the research, either the patient should get patient should get benefited directly, or the data what we are getting from the subject indirectly, other people should get benefited. So there should be some benefit out of the research. If no benefit either to the patient or to the other community or society, then there is no need of doing such a research, and a trial should be initiated and continued only if the anticipated benefit justify the risk. And where do we apply this principle? So the principle two, the benefit risk assessment, is applied through conducting a thorough search of available scientific information about the investigational product or procedure, including finding from test in laboratory animal and any previous human experience. So now we have PharmD, pharmacy, and PhD students. Anyone, when you do research, so what will you do first? First, your guide will ask you to do a thorough literature review. So why you have been asked to do that? So because before you go into the research, first you should know the risk and benefit, what is done so far on the drug molecule or this investigational product. So what is the scientific information you have either on the preclinical or clinical? So that is important. So the principle two is we are applying in the clinical trial. And principle three in GCP is right and safety of the trial subject is very important. So most imperative consideration for their rights and safety. So prevail over interest of science and society. So whatever you want to do, it may have very good scientific outcome, but let it be second. First you talk to the patient or the participant, you get their consent, and their safety and well-being is very important rather than bringing something new in the science. So how do we apply this? I think by the time you know, so we apply this rule in through appropriate study design and through ethical and scientific and where applicable regulatory review of the study protocol prior to its initiation. And the fourth guidelines is available non-clinical and clinical information should be adequate on the investigational product to support the proposed clinical trial. So directly one cannot go to clinical trial. So now we have this strict guideline because of the existing GCP guideline. So we should have adequate non-clinical or some clinical information if suppose already we started. So those has to be compared. So this principle 4 is applied through developing the investigator's brochure, because investigator brochure is the one which is having A to Z all information. So starting from the chemistry, biology, how we discovered, what is the lead compound, what is the target taken, what is the animal species taken, how far the pharmacology, toxicological effect, everything will be there in the investigator's brochure. So by developing the brochure and protocol and developing the informed consent document to adequately, accurately, and objectively reflect the available scientific information on foreseeable risk and anticipated benefit. And in the guideline 5, we have um, the clinical trial should have a clear and detailed study protocol and should be scientifically sound. So, writing a study protocol is an specific art. So until otherwise we have the scientific background, you cannot write a protocol. To write a protocol, one should have thorough knowledge in clinical research, one should have thorough knowledge in clinical pharmacy, thorough knowledge in pharmacotherapeutics, because to do a research, not only a research knowledge, we should also have therapeutics knowledge and clinical knowledge. Then only you can write a protocol, a clear and detailed protocol. So this writing protocol is important. Without writing protocol, you cannot undergo a clinical research. So how it is applied through? So you know very well that we are writing protocol and presenting to the committee. So the committee is giving approval or disapproval or modification, minor, major, based on the content of the protocol, and it complies with the requirements established by national and local laws and regulation and undergo scientific and ethical review prior to implementation. And clinical trial should be conducted in compliance with the trial protocol received prior approval from the IRB. So without IRB approval, nobody can do this research, and protocol review by IRB is constituted and operating in accordance with GCP and applicable national laws, verifiable investigator adherence to the protocol requirement. So just to doing initiating submitting protocol and getting approval, after that changing as per your wish is not a right ethical way. If in case something you want to change, you can go for a protocol amendment. Further procedure is there, one has to follow that. And the submission of any protocol changes to the sponsor and to the IRB or IEC prior to their implementation is very important. And effective monitoring of the study by the sponsor is also important to check whether the study is going as per the information given in the protocol. So now all this we are doing as a routine. Now you may be feeling bored that what SAR is presenting new, because you are used to all this, because we have everything in this guideline now. We are doing as a routine nowadays all of this, but we just look as a pack what is this GCP guideline. And qualified physician always be responsibility of a trial. So whenever we do clinical trial, we need a medically qualified person to be the investigator. So why we need a medically qualified person who is known as principal investigator? Because he is a physician. As per the law, as per our country law, a physician is eligible to write the prescription, isn't it? So pharmacist or nurse or no other professional, physician is eligible to write the prescription. and the patient is taking this medication because prescription is given by the doctor. And once the patient is taking the drug, some unwanted problem, some anaphylactic reaction, something goes wrong, then the emergency medical care can be given by the doctor. So that is the reason we say for clinical trial we need a qualified physician to be principal investigator. So not for all the research. Now you take your PhD, my PhD. For my PhD, I was the principal investigator because we are not doing trial. We are doing post-marketing surveillance. We are just comparing the existing drugs which has already come into the market. We made groups and we are observing and doing research. So what I'm saying is for a clinical trial, first time exposure of a drug molecule to the human subject, we need a qualified physician to lead the team as a principal investigator, and he can have co-investigator also based on the workload they have in the trial, and medical care given to and medical decision made on behalf of participant. That is the reason we demand a qualified physician. And now we are applying this because now we are doing the responsibility of clinical investigator to the study subject and through sponsored selection of qualified investigator. So investigator is selected for a trial by the sponsor. For that matter, sponsor is preparing investigator brochure and giving to the investigator. So now the investigator, that is a doctor, will go through the investigator brochure, and if he is willing, he will give his consent to be a part of the study as investigator or co-investigator. So now this process we are doing as a routine. So why we are doing and how we are doing means it is there in principle 7 in the GCP guideline. And the eighth guideline is involved in conducting a trial should be qualified by individual and education, training, experience. So not only the PA, but also other member who are all involved in the trial. Everyone should have education into their field. Everybody must undergo training. Everybody should have experience in doing research to perform the designated task. So not only one person, all the people who are all involved, because doing trial is not a one man show. Not only one person can do a trial. We need a doctor, we need a nurse, we need a pharmacist, we need a auditor, we need a statistician. So we need a MBA person to promote the drugs. Many team people involved in doing a trial. Everyone should be qualified on their subject matters and should undergo training and experience. So now we are applying this without experience or without proper degree, we don't recruit the staff in the study. And the ninth rule in GCP is freely given informed consent, which is needed to obtain from the trial participant before we recruit them in the research. So already this point was discussed by the previous speaker. I don't want to spend much of time in this. And the 10th point is clinical trial information need a proper recording, handling, and storage of the document, which allow the precise reporting, interpretation, and verification. Because documentation is very, very important. If we are not documenting it, meaning indirectly that you have not done anything. I have done something means then I have to show the document. So document is not there, meaning I have not done anything. So that is the only interpretation. So whatever we do, anything, even suppose we do randomization, block randomization. So how the blocks are framed, what ratio blocks are taken, everything, each and every steps, whatever we do in clinical trial has to be documented so that one wants to redo the test, he can do it. So we should give space for repeating the procedure, not keeping the procedure with me and I will not allow others to do the procedure means it is not a right way. So we have to have a transparent procedure and recording, handling, and storing the data. So which we are doing now in the existing practice. And the 11th guideline is protection of the trial subject, the confidentiality. Again, in the informed consent process, we write this statement: we take care of your confidentiality, because when a subject is coming to a research for a trial, he is coming as a participant. So for other disease, suppose he is COVID or diabetes or hypertension, that is nothing wrong. The patients don't want to hide. For example, we have some sensitive disease like patient is suffering with the syphilis, patient is suffering with HIV, isn't it? So that time he don't want to declare to the community that he is HIV patient. So he is maintaining his secret. So that is his confidentiality is there. But since I am using in the research, I cannot just put all these are my research participant in HIV research, means then everybody come to know that these people are HIV patient. So that should not be done. So we have to maintain the confidentiality of the research subject. Who are all my research patient? Only the research team should know, not everyone. So we have to maintain the confidentiality of the trial subject and their details. So that is the part which we are doing. We are getting that in the informed consent, and we are doing. So you know that we are doing this as a routine procedure. And the 12th rule in the GCP is investigational product should be manufactured, handled, stored according to GMP practice, good manufacturing practice. Because we are doing a trial by appointing an investigator, co-investigator, pharmacist as a clinical research coordinator, CRO, manager, auditor. Many people are involved and we are doing trial, and everyone is waiting for the trial data. If the trial data is having its own credibility, then only it can be reported to the regulatory authority that this drug can be taken to the market. So now the trial data is based on the trial product what we are giving to the patient. So the trial product, the investigational product should have the quality. So for that matter, we say that investigational product should be manufactured according to the GMP, good manufacturing practice, so that only we can trust what the data which we generate from the clinical trial. And the last rule in the GCP is system with the procedure that assure the quality of every aspect of the trial should be implemented. So of course we do this. So now we have seen all 13 guidelines or rules of GCP, and whether it is required for all the staffs involved in clinical research must be trained in GCP. Yes, of course, who are all involved in clinical research, everybody must undergo GCP training, because GCP by definition, you know, it is a internationally accepted standard for scientific quality as well as for ethics. So everybody should undergo training. And GCP is not specific to protocol. Suppose you are right, you are doing your PhD or research on the diabetes, so GCP is not separate for diabetic study. If you are suppose working on a cancer, GCP is not giving any specific guideline for cancer. GCP is not specific to a study protocol. GCP is a common platform. Any research, any area you work out, you have to follow these 13 guidelines which we discussed right now. And it clearly specifies the roles and responsibilities of personnel involved in, and it highlights the protection of human rights in clinical trial, and it provides standard on how the clinical trial should be conducted, and provide assurance of safety of newly developed compounds. So for this matter, everybody should undergo GCP training, and anyone directly involved in designing the protocol or conducting a trial or oversight the trial site or management of research involving human participant, including research staff, backup staff, contractor, subcontractor, consultant, so who perform key study function, everybody should complete GCP training. So non-study staff at the research site who provide standard care or other non-study related service should be encouraged to complete the GCP training, but it is not mandatory for them because they are not directly involved in clinical research, but they can be encouraged to undergo GCP training. So this is my GCP training, which I undergone very recently for the NABH accreditation of the one hospital where I am the member of ethics committee. So the committee has told me that I should undergo GCP training and should submit the certificate for NABH purpose. So I just undergone the GCP training. So when I undergone GCP training, you can also undergo, because it is going to take only 4 to 6 hours to complete. It is not a big course. Just within 4 to 6 hours, you can undergo training and submit the report to the NABH or any people wherever or whoever is giving training on GCP. And who is responsible for GCP complaints? So now we have studied what is good clinical practice, what are all different different rules we have seen. Now who is responsible for all this? So who is taking care that in a clinical trial all these 13 principles are followed? So when something goes wrong, it is in clinical trial, because I told clinical trial is not one man show, many professionals are involved. When something goes wrong, not one is saying I am not responsible, he is responsible, and it is not my fault, his fault, her fault. So not like blaming others. So the responsibility is not just something handing over to others. The responsibility has to come within us. Yeah, I am a part, I am responsible. So such type of attitude must be there. And who are all involved in clinical research, everybody should say that there we are all responsible, and individual should be responsible. So the sponsor, investigator, ethics committee, CROs, research staff, clinical research coordinator, CRA, medical monitor, data entry personnel, and others like auditors, everybody is involved in giving in doing a clinical research according to GCP compliance. So, on the nutshell and the completion of my talk, I just give you the take home message that GCP is a international standard guideline. It is taking care of ethics as well as the scientific quality data, and GCP should be followed throughout the period of trial, not only just writing protocol and getting approval, then doing whatever you want, not like that. Throughout the period of the trial, we have to follow the GCP guideline. And how the guideline is framed means, for that one should remember about Nuremberg Code, Declaration of Helsinki, Belmont Report, and every staff who are all directly involved in trial should undergo GCP training. And there are 13 different principles, and GCP compliance provides the public assurance that we are protecting the patients and we are bringing the quality data. And to maintain the GCP compliance in a trial, all the member involved in trial are responsible for the GCP compliance. So this is about the topic. Any questions? I am happy to handle.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for a wonderful session, sir. Delegates, please post your questions in the comment section. We have a question, sir. How long should we store the records for academic studies?
Can I see the question?
Yes, sir. How long should we store the records for academic studies?
Yes, now I am seeing. How long should we store the record for academic studies? So for academic studies means you mean your PhD or PG should be
Yes,
stored for records of academic studies. So generally we store for 5 years. Any research we do, we need to store it for 5 years. After that, we can convert the hard copy data into soft copy, and we can discard the hard copy data.
next question. Should participants be informed about the trial drug after the completion of the study in case if the study is blinded?
When we do blinding study, you know, single blind, double blind, triple blind is there. So in any of the blinding, either single, double, triple, and all this confirm we are going to blind the participant, we should tell the participant that I am going to do a blind research. I have two group. For one group, I am going to give a drug. For another group, I am not going to give the drug. And I don't know you belongs to which group. So this information should be informed to them and get their consent. And after completion of the trial, now everyone, not only participant, we are going to publish the data, we are going to surrender to the regulatory authority. So now everybody will come to know what is group 1 and what is group 2. So obviously the patient will also come to know nothing wrong in that.
Okay. How to do amendments in clinical trial protocol?
Yes, so in clinical trial protocol, the amendment is not a big deal. Amendment, again, you can go whether you are going for protocol violation or protocol deviation. So there are two terminology. So protocol violation and protocol deviation. So protocol deviation is minor changes, whereas protocol violation is completely going out of the primary objective. So suppose now I want to measure blood sugar level. This is what I wrote in protocol and I got ethics committee approval. But upon doing research, I am also planning along with the blood sugar level, why don't I measure lipid profile also? So I just wish to measure one more parameter. Now what can I do? I can write letter to the ethics committee, to member secretary, through proper channel, that is the investigator or the principal, whoever. So through proper channel, I can write letter to the ethics committee stating the approval number of the study. I can quote that I have written in the protocol that I am measuring only diabetes level. Now I wish to measure also lipid profile. Like that, you can request them. The committee will go through and they will give you approval. So this is called the protocol amendment. I am just to making amendment. So this is protocol deviation. So what I planned, I just deviated from that. So violation is not doing what I planned. My objective was something, but now what I am going to do is something. So for violation, the protocol amendment, it is again up to the committee, that is up to the ethics committee to decide whether this can be given approval or not.
Thank you so much, sir. It has been a wonderful session. We would like to meet you again in another session very soon. Thank you, sir.
So thank you very much to um, Praveen for calling me for this program. So my thanks to management of St. Peter's, as well as our own management of the Ramchandra Institute of Higher Education for permitting me to do this. So as you said, we can meet in another wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Dharani, Assistant Professor, St. Peter's Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences, to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Sirajuddin Sheikh.
Good evening, a warm welcome to all. Now we'll start the session for overview of clinical research process by Dr. Sirajuddin S. Sheikh. Before going to the session, may I take pleasure of introducing the speaker to you. Dr. Sirajuddin is a lecturer, academic clinical pharmacist in King Khalid University in Department of Clinical Pharmacy, Saudi Arabia. He has 15 years of teaching experience with many research publications. He is also peer reviewer for Journal of Diabetes Investigation, Saudi Medical Journal, Scientific Research Publishing, International Journal of Clinical Practice. He has served as counseling and dispensing pharmacist in United Pharmaceutic Est at Kingdom Saudi Arabia for 5 years. He awarded PhD degree in the Faculty of Clinical Pharmacy from Annamalai University, Tamil Nadu. He is a member of various professional bodies such as International Society for Pharmacoeconomics and Outcome Research, APTI, and Indian Pharmaceutical Association. It's a pleasure to have you among us, sir. I welcome you to start this session. Thank you, sir.
Good evening,
Thank you
sir.
very much for your. Yeah, Praveen. Am I audible? Am I visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Sir, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Praveen. Thank you, Dr. Dharani, for your introduction. And I'm really very happy to be a part of this session. And I'm Dr. Siraj, and I'm working in King Khalid University. And I would like to thank the organizers of this session and the previous speakers who have given valuable informations about the good clinical practice. And the topic I have chosen today is the overview clinical research process. For the next 20 minutes or 25 minutes, I'll be dwelling upon human research definition, clinical research and development processes, and overview of clinical research process, and important points to be remembered when you conduct a clinical trial. So these are all some of the outlines that I'm going to cover in this section. And yeah, Praveen, I cannot see my slides.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Praveen? Yes. Yes, Praveen. I think most of the introduction parts were covered by the previous speakers. I think it's better to go to slide number 13. Yes. Okay. So as I told you, um, The story of a disease and the mankind's struggle against the disease is an ongoing process since the evolution of mankind, and man is trying to combat the diseases by using available herbs and other minerals and materials by out of speculations, or he tried to prove the efficacy of the medicines by trying it on animals and the human beings. Okay, so the definition of human research can be as any proposal relating to human subjects, including healthy volunteers, that cannot be considered as an element of accepted clinical management or public health practice, and involves either physical or physiological intervention or observation, collection, storage, and dissemination of information regarding individuals. So, since being were used to prove the efficacy and the safety of the medicinal agents, okay, and some of the researches were fruitful, but most of the researches were unfruitful, and it bring and devastations to the human society, as mentioned by the previous speakers. So from the sulfathilamide to till the Tuskegee study, syphilis studies, human being have come across a lot of devastating results by human research. But as Dr. Jindra mentioned, so volunteers are very important to find out the safety and efficacy of drugs. So we need to do the researches with human beings. So volunteers are the pillars for the clinical trials, and because of those bitter events and experiences we faced during the human research, so many organizations have come across with some of the set of rules and regulations for conducting a good clinical research using the human beings. Okay, so here WHO has given a set of key trial activities. Go to slide number 13, Praveen. Yeah, next. Okay, so the WHO has given a set of key trial activities to conduct a good clinical trial within the good clinical practice. So here in this clinical trials, we have the clinical trial members as well as the clinical trial processes. Clinical trial members are the sponsors, the clinical investigators, and the IRBs, the ethical committee, and the authorities, national or local authorities. And the processes are preparation of informed consent, preparation of investigator brochures, preparation of checklist, and preparation of other documents which are needed for conducting a clinical trial. So, as we have seen with our previous speakers, so most of the processes and the necessary materials have been discussed to conduct a clinical trial. The first key activity in conducting a clinical trial is development of a trial protocol. So, Dr. Raj has explained about the protocol very clearly and very detailedly. So, there is a popular saying in English that well begun is half done. So if you prepare the protocol, a trial protocol in a good manner, in a perfect manner, then it is the first step, first important and crucial step you have to do in preparing the trial protocol. So the trial protocol is integral part of the objective of your study, the design, methodology, risk identification, and the considerations and organization of the trial. So these are all the integral part of the protocol, and the person responsible for preparing the trial protocol is the sponsor, often in the consultation with one or more clinical investigators. So the second key activity in a clinical trial is development of standard operating procedures. So standard operating procedures means a set of rules or a step-by-step instructions to carry out a particular task. So this is called as the standard operating procedure. The standard of the operation procedure will be prepared by all parties, from the sponsors to the authorities. So sponsors will be having a set of SOPs, and the clinical investigators will be having a set of SOPs, and the ethical committee will be having a set of SOPs, and the authorities, national or international authorities, will be having a set of should have a set of SOPs, standard operating procedure, to conduct a clinical trial in an effective manner. For example, the sponsors should develop the standard operating procedure for developing or updating protocol, the standard operating procedures for the investigator brochures, and they should have a standard operating procedure for shipping or handling the investigational products, and they should have a standard operating procedure for monitoring the trials from the start up until the end, and they should have a standard operating procedure for auditing various aspects of the clinical trials. Okay, and the clinical investigators should be ready with some standard operating procedures for trial related procedures, like how to communicate with ethical committee members, okay, how to hand over the informed consent, how to get them back from the participants, okay, and they should be ready with some SOPs for adverse drug reactions reporting, and they should be ready with some standard operating procedures for communicating with the sponsors, as well as communicating with the participants and all. And the ethical committee should be having some standard operating procedures, like to review the protocol submitted by the research team, and reviewing in the beginning as well as during the research, ongoing researches. So these are all some of the standard operating procedures should be prepared and kept in effect by the various members of the clinical trial. Okay, and the third clinical trial activity is the development of a support system and tool. So the support, all the support and the tools of for conducting a clinical trial effectively should be provided by the sponsor. The sponsor should provide the supports and other documents, like development of support system and tools like trial related documents, the computers related hardwares and softwares, electronic patient diaries, diagnostic and lab laboratory equipments, so communication tools to report ADRs, so on. So the sponsors should provide all these support and tools to conduct the clinical trial effectively. Next slide. The next key trial activity is generation and approval of trial-related documents. So the one who is responsible for generation and approval of the trial-related document is the sponsor. So the sponsor has to prepare the trial-related documents like investigator brochures, various forms related to the supplies of the investigational medicines, like the purchase of medicine and the shipping of the medicine and storage of the medicine and the supply logs and all. Okay, signature logs, case report forms, informed consent documents, adverse reactions and safety reporting forms, administrative forms, forms for progress report, and annual report, and so on. So these these documents should be prepared, generated, and approved by the clinical research team, and it should be ready before we begin the clinical trial. And the person responsible for preparing all these documents is the sponsor. The next key trial activity is selection of trial sites and the selection of properly qualified, trained, and experienced investigators and study personals. So this is also done by the sponsor. The sponsor is the one who is responsible for choosing the clinical clinical investigators who are expert in that particular research field. Okay, and the sponsor is the one who should know about the circumstances of the study sites and the recruitment of the study personals and the participants. And the person responsible for selection of trial sites and the research and the selection of properly qualified, trained, and experienced investigator is the sponsor. And the next key trial activity is ethical committee review and approval of protocol. So as discussed by the previous speakers, the protocol is an important document which should be prepared in a good manner, and it should be sent to the ethical committee for approval. And if there is any changes or amendments in the protocol, it should be done by the clinical investigator, and he should reapply it to get the approval from the ethics committee. And the person responsible for preparing this protocol and submitting it to the ethical committee and getting permission is the clinical investigator. Next. The next key trial activity is review by regulatory authorities. So the regulatory authorities are different from setting to setting, like country to country. So there are some national and regional and international authorities are there. Within good clinical practice, studies must undergo review by the regulatory authorities for use of the investigational products or intervention in human subjects. So the person responsible for preparing the documents for related to the clinical trials and submission is the sponsor. The next key trial activity is enrollment of subjects into the study. So like recruitment, eligibility, seeing the eligibility for enrolling into the study, and giving information, informed consent. Within the GCP, informed consent must be obtained from each study subject prior to the enrollment in the study or performing any specific study procedures. So the person who is responsible for enrolling the study participants and getting the informed consent from individual participant and convincing them to take part in this clinical trial is the clinical investigator. Next. The next trial activity is bringing up the investigational product. So this is done by the sponsor. So if we are doing research on a new investigational product or a test drug, it is the responsibility of the sponsor to purchase or to bring the investigational product, and he is the one who should maintain the quality of the investigational product, and the investigational product that he has brought should be complying with the good manufacturing practice, and it should be handled and stored, and other aspects related to this investigation product should be according to the good manufacturing practice. And the person who is responsible for handling this investigation product or the test drug is the sponsor. Okay, the next trial activity is the trial data acquisition, conducting the trial. The clinical investigator is responsible for conducting the trial, and the research should be conducted according to the approved protocol and applicable regulatory requirements. So as we have discussed already, the protocol should be prepared, and it should be approved by the ethical committee, and the research should be according to the protocol that has been approved by the ethical committee. So it is the responsibility of the clinical investigator who makes sure that the to the protocol, and if there is any deviation in this protocol, it should be immediately informed to the ethical committee, as well as the deviation. Once we get approval from the ethical committee, this deviation should be informed to all the sites wherever the clinical trial is being taking place. Maybe the clinical trial may take place around the world, so all the trial centers should be notified about this clinical changes. It is the responsibility of the clinical investigator who contact the ethical committee for the matters related to the deviation of the protocol, and he has to inform the deviations, approved deviations, to the sponsor, and the sponsor will contact the other site investigators for the changes that has been done in the protocol. Next. Yeah, and the next trial activity is safety management and reporting. So at the beginning of the clinical trial, the clinical investigators are provided with the investigator brochures. Investigator brochures brochure which consists of all the details about the test drug or the investigation drug. So this product. Okay, so the managed for any unwanted or undesired effects found during this clinical trial, it should be reported. The clinical investigator is the responsible for reporting this unwanted or undesired effects during this clinical trial. So if the undesired or unintended uh, effect is already there in the investigator brochure, it has to be recorded. If the adverse drug reaction or unintended reaction is away from what is written in the brochure, then it should be taken serious, and the seriousness of this adverse drug reaction should be measured. And if it is very serious, it should be immediately informed to the sponsor, and the sponsor has to contact the regulatory authorities, and the regulatory authority will decide either to continue the research or uh, uh, to withheld the research. So this is the combined responsibility of the clinical investigator as well as the sponsor. The clinical investigator will inform the adverse reactions or untoward reactions which are not mentioned in the brochure to the sponsor, and the sponsor will intimate these untoward reactions to the authorities, and then it is up to the authorities to continue or to withhold the clinical research process. And monitoring the trial is the next key activity. The sponsors generally perform site monitoring. So my monitoring, as I told you already, the monitoring takes place at the beginning of the trial, and then and the middle of the trial, and at the end of the trial. And the sponsors generally monitor the clinical trials, or they themselves monitor the clinical trial, or they hire some CROs, clinical research organizations, to monitor the trial, so that make sure that the trial is is going on from the top to bottom, from the recruitment of the participants till the reporting of the trial data. Okay, and the next trial activity is managing trial data. So trial data is very crucial, and management of trial data is very important. Within GCP, the clinical trial data should be complete integrity is preserved. So the reason why we adopt the GCP is the main important reason, or one is the safety for the participants. The participants' safety, well-being, the respect is preserved. And the second important objective of adopting GCP is the data should be accurate and reliable and processed in a correct way. So here, the key trial activity maintains and preserve the data reliability. Okay, data management includes all processes and procedures for collecting, handling, manipulating, analyzing, and storing or archiving of data from study from the start to the completion. The person who is responsible for managing the trial data is the sponsor. Next. Okay, so we have come to the last clinical trial activity, reporting the trial. So far we have complying with all the GCP guidelines for conducting a clinical trial, and we have conducted the clinical trial, and we collected the data, and we managed the data. So it is a crucial step to report your data to the authorities. So reporting is, as I told you, it's very crucial because the authorities will focus on the reporting the trial, the data that you have reporting to. So if the data reporting of the clinical trial data is not done in a perfect manner, then there are chances for your clinical trial be rejected by the authorities. So it is very important to report your clinical trial data to the authorities in a good manner. So the reports should generally include a description of the ethical aspects of the study. So you will describe about what type of ethical aspects has been followed in conducting your studies. A description of the administrative structure of the study, the administrative structures like who are the investigators, in which site the clinical trial was conducted, and what are the other facilities provided to conduct the clinical trial. Also, all these things should be mentioned in the report, and a introduction that explains the critical features and the context of the study. The context of the study should be clearly mentioned in the report, like what is the rationale to conduct the study, what are the aim and objectives of the study, who are the target population, and what treatment what is the treatment given, and what is the treatment duration, okay, and so on should be mentioned in this report. And a summary of study objectives should be mentioned. A description of overall study design and plan should be mentioned in the report. A description of any protocol amendments. For example, if there was any protocol amendment was done during the clinical trial process, it should be described here. What were the amendments done? What was the original protocol, and what were the amendments, and how the approval was got for this amendments. All these things are mentioned in this report. An accounting of all subjects who are participated in the study, including all important deviations from the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and the decision of a subject who discontinued after enrollment. So these are all should be mentioned in this report. And and accounting of protocol violations. If there are any, it should be mentioned. So usually there will be no violations. There may be deviations, protocol deviations, but there won't be any protocol violations. If there are violations, then the authorities will not allow you to continue that study. And a discussion of any interim analysis. So usually when we conduct the clinical trial, we used to do some progress analysis, like if the clinical trial is lasting for 4 or 5 years, we used to have an annual report, or we used to have annual analysis, and the results that have been received so far, and the analysis of those results, to make sure that our clinical trial is going in a right way, and it confirms that benefits are ensured for those participants. So for these things, we will do some interim analysis, or periodical analysis, and these results should be mentioned and included in the report. Next. And efficacy evaluation, like who were recruited, like which subject is recruited, on what basis they were recruited, what are the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, what are the reasons for some of the study subjects has withdrawn from these clinical trial. All these things should be mentioned in the report. And yeah, safety evaluation, like what medicine was given, what was the extent of exposure of that particular medicine, and what are the adverse drug events experienced during this clinical trial, and what are the laboratory changes took place during this clinical trial, and who left the clinical trial, and who did during this clinical trial, and what are the reasons for these untoward things happened during this clinical trial. All these things should be mentioned in the report, and a discussion and overall conclusion regarding the efficacy and safety results, and the relationship of risk and benefits should be mentioned, and the tables, figures, and graphs that visually summarize the important results, or to clarify the results that are not easy to understand, should be clearly placed in the report, and a reference list should also be included in the report. So with all these things, we used to report our clinical trial data to the authority for the approval. So these are the overview of how to conduct a clinical trial. It starts with the protocol preparation, and it goes through many cascades and procedures, and the last step of this clinical trial is reporting the clinical trial data to the authorities. So these are, so it is not necessary that the sequence should be followed. Sometimes in based on the circumstances, 2 or 3 key activities can be done simultaneously. So it's up to the sponsor and the clinical investigator. But the things what we are doing during the clinical trial should not violate the rules and regulations of the good clinical practice. Next. So far what we have seen is what are the steps involved in, or what are the key trial activities involved in the performance of the clinical trial. And here I'm going to give you some of the important points to be remembered when you conduct a clinical trial. The first point is the safety of the participants. So it has been discussed elaborately by the previous speakers. And the second thing is the protocol should be prepared in a good manner for conducting a clinical trial. Research involving human should be scientifically justified and described in clear, detailed protocol. Okay, and when you conduct a clinical trial, you have to foresee the risks that may happen out of the clinical trial. Okay, and you should have a plan to tackle or overcome those risks. And when you conduct a clinical trial, the product that you are going to use, you should collect the previous studies and clinical and preclinical data regarding the investigational drugs, so that it is assured that the investigational drug that you are going to use on the human beings will not do any harm. Next. And the benefit and risks about this clinical research, as I mentioned earlier, even though there are some risks, the benefit should exceed the risks, and these benefits and risks should be clearly informed to the patients who are taking part in this clinical trial. And and throughout this clinical trial, the benefit should be favored. Research involving humans should be continued only if the benefit risk profile remains favorable. After beginning the clinical trial, if the risk exceeds the benefits, then the trial should be stopped, and it should be informed to the authorities. And the research protocol should get approval from the ethical committee, and informed consent should be freely given to the patients, and all the aspects of the research should be informed to the patients, and the signature should be got from the patients. And the medical professionals should be around during the clinical trial if there are something going wrong. Next. And the clinical trial should be conducted with qualified and highly trained staff members, and the data that were produced from the clinical trial should be clear, and it should be the integrity of the data should be preserved, and the identities of all the patients who have taken part in the clinical trial should be confidential, and the investigational medicines that were under trial should be prepared with good manufacturing practice. The preparation, storage, and administration should be complying with the good manufacturing practice, and the quality should be assured throughout the clinical trial. So these are some of the points to be remembered when you conduct a clinical trial. So, and if you know what are the key clinical trial activities, and if you know what are the points to be remembered during the clinical trial, then for sure you will become a good clinical trial personnel. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for a wonderful session, sir. And it has been a great and thought-provoking session. Delegate, please post your queries in the comment section. So we have a question. Can a clinical trial be fast-forwarded?
Yes. It, yes. Can a clinical trial be fast forwarded? Yeah. During some emergency situations like in Corona, the authorities can give you emergency approval for clinical trials, and it can be fast forwarded.
Okay, sir. So if a drug is to be marketed in India, should they do clinical trial in India?
See, actually, the clinical trials, because when Dr. Praveen was when Dr. Raj was saying, it's not necessary to do the clinical trial country-wise. Okay, if a clinical trial was done in one country, okay, under the guidelines of ICH and GCP, then it can be approved in all over the countries. But when the drug is marketed in other countries, the post-marketing surveillance should be done to see if there are any um, unwanted or untoward reactions taking place during this taking this medicine in different ethnicities.
Yes, sir. And So do we need a separate trial for different formulation from phase 1 itself?
Do we need to do separate trial for different formulations? Yes, we need to do.
Okay, so thank you so much, sir. That was a wonderful and thought-provoking session, and thank you for joining us all the way from Saudi Arabia for this evening. Thank you, sir. It was a glorious and thought-provoking evening. I would now request our principal, Dr. P. Rajashekar, to give us concluding remarks on the valediction. Due to technical difficulties, I now request the organizing secretary, Dr. P. Ranadir Chaudhary, to deliver the vote of thanks. Dr. Ranadir Chaudhary, please unmute your mic.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank our beloved chairman, Sri T. Jayapal Reddy sir, for giving us the opportunity to conduct this international webinar on such a crucial topic. We would like to thank our speakers, Dr. M. Vijayanandi from Wales Institute of Science, Technology and Advanced Studies, Chennai, Dr. Jitendra Chemakurti, Principal Vignan Foundation, Guntur, Dr. M. G. Rajanand from Sri Ramchandra Faculty of Pharmacy, Chennai, and Dr. Sirajuddin Sheikh from King Khalid University, Saudi Arabia, for giving us such wonderful lectures and enlightening us on GCP principles. We would also like to thank all the registered delegates from across the globe for participating in this event. As the organizing secretary, it is my honor to thank Dr. P. Rajshekar, Principal, LOC Chair, and Dr. Praveen, HOD and Convener. I also thank the organizing committee members, Ms. Shivani, Dr. Dharani, and Ms. Anusha for their constant effort in organizing this event. We would also like to thank all the teaching and non-teaching faculty of St. Peter's Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences for their support. I thank one and all for participating in this wonderful session. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful session. We hope to meet you soon in another thought-provoking webinar on some clinical pharmacy aspects as well as on pharmacotherapeutics. Thank you all for this wonderful day.